This is the story of an extraordinary building. It is situated in Bilbao, the capital of Spain's Basque country. The ancient city was founded in the 12th century on the banks of the river Nervión as a trading and fishing port. In the 19th century, it became an important center of shipbuilding. Its long history is reflected in the strength and richness of its culture and the distinctive and independent character of its people. Today's Bilbao is a place of parks, squares, and handsome buildings. The emphasis has shifted away from its industrial past. In recent years, there has been an almost total loss of heavy industry. Close to the city centre, large derelict areas show where once iron and steel were processed. The Basque administration decided to embark on an ambitious long-term scheme of urban and cultural renewal. They commissioned internationally renowned architects and engineers to revitalize the city and modernize its transport links. Glass and steel shells add a new dimension to the street architecture. They mark the entrances to subway stations designed by the British architect Sir Norman Foster. The Nervión River, which winds through the center of Bilbao to the sea, plays an important part in the regeneration plan. The elegant Campo Volantín footbridge, suspended on cables, sweeps in a wide curve over the water. It was created by the Spanish architect and engineer, Santiago Calatrava. One of the Basque administration's most ambitious plans was to enter into a partnership with the Solomon R. Guggenheim Foundation, with the aim of creating a European center for modern and contemporary art in Bilbao. They decided to hold a limited competition, and 3 internationally respected architects were invited to submit ideas for the project. The brief stipulated that the building was to be of outstanding quality, a modern classic on a par with the Guggenheim's famous headquarters in New York. This expressionist building was designed in the 1950s by the American architect Frank Lloyd Wright. The winner of the Bilbao competition was Canadian-born Frank Gehry. He's a fellow of the American Institute of Architecture and has received some of the most prestigious awards in his field. Not formally aligned with any specific architectural movement, his original and idiosyncratic style breaks free of existing spatial boundaries. Gehry's inspired design of the new Guggenheim was to be instrumental in placing Bilbao decisively on the world cultural map. His museum is an unforgettable sight. A huge abstract sculpture in limestone, glass, and gleaming titanium. It's a wonderfully exuberant building. Each volume generates luminous reflections and deep gold shadows. It is art on a grand architectural scale. At Bilbao, as with all his design projects, Gehry's initial approach was a comprehensive evaluation of the site.
I live in a fantasy that I work exactly like every other architect, and I'm always surprised that they don't work like I do, because it seems like it's the only way to work. I start out with a very pragmatic program and do a lot of study of the program, and I make a model of the site. And I make models in 2 or 3 scales, because I found over the years that if I only work in one scale, I become enamored with the object. And to keep my eye focused on the finished building, by shifting scales constantly, I have to think real building. So it's a trick that I use, and it's a good one, though. It works. And I've done it all my life, from the time I left school.
He is an architect known for his sensitivity to the environment. and his ability to integrate his work successfully within an industrial city scene. This was especially true in Bilbao, where the abandoned site contained derelict factory buildings.
The site was industrial and tough and unusual because the thing that Bilbao has is this very wonderful valley, green valley, which surrounds the city and saves everything, even the bad architecture, because you have this halo of green around everything. The context is quite beautiful.
The Basques emphasized the importance of the building having a commanding visual presence, bringing the city into the site. Gary indicated on the town map how the museum should be a strong focal point from the north side of the river, from the Museum of Fine Arts, and from the City Hall Bridge to the east. An essential part of the competition brief was that the Puente de la Salve, a busy road bridge and a main traffic artery leading into the city, should be part of the scheme. Gary met this challenge by extending one of the great museum galleries right under the span of the bridge itself, and so integrating it into the volume of the building. And here, where the gallery ends, a dramatic limestone tower rises 50 meters high, a sculptural signpost to the museum.
The idea that you could build a building and they create a gateway with the bridge and create a sense that these cars are driving into the building gave it a kind of dynamic.
Although the 19th century city is elevated above the river, the museum itself is down at water level. So when viewed along a city street, the museum respects the scale of the buildings without overwhelming them. Frank Gehry's designs have evolved over the years, growing in sophistication and complexity. The origins of his work are apparent in his earlier buildings. In the 1989 Vitra International Furniture Museum in Germany, the exterior forms are far simpler than at the Guggenheim, and limited to tilted cubes and simple flowing curves. Yet 4 years later, at the Frederick Weissman Museum in Minneapolis, he is exploring fractured geometry and concepts which would culminate in Bilbao, but here were constrained by design and construction technology. It wasn't until 1996, in the dramatic glass facade of the Nederlanden office building in Prague, that technical developments allowed Gehry the artistic freedom to move towards his present dynamic grammar. This building is startlingly contemporary in an historic city, yet its corner towers pay homage to Prague's distinctive architecture. One tower is a strong cylindrical form. The other, with striking vertical glazing, leans close like a dancing partner, a graceful hourglass balanced on stilt-like pillars.
Whenever I do anything, I grow from the last projects, and it's very difficult to change your language over a lifetime even. So a lot of things are of the family of, and I think some of the work here, some of the shapes even, as well as the technology, comes from Prague.
When looking at a building as complex and unconventional as the Guggenheim, one wonders at the design process and the advanced techniques required for its realization. Gehry sees the first steps towards the final construction as an evolution. He makes endless sketches, as though searching through the paper for the eventual building forms.
I start sketching by myself in my own, wherever I am, on the plane, on the train, wherever I am. And these drawings are not very legible to most mortals, but they are to me. And they make sense to most mortals only after the building's finished and they see them. And they see a lot of the characteristics of the building in those early sketches. Like the one for Bilbao, there's so much of what ended up in the building that it freaks me out. I can't believe it.
Gehry and his staff then make models from paper, cardboard and wood that emulate his drawings. They are photographed and projected onto screens, and individual elements are continually adjusted and refined. The models, as many as 50 of them, are like three-dimensional sketches.
And I'll move a piece of the model a 16th of an inch and sit there for 2 weeks and look at it, and I'll move it back or I'll move it aside. And so all these forms have endless amounts of models.
Points on the edges and surfaces of the models were digitized with a light pen and converted into electronic images. These computer wireframes allowed Gehry to measure quickly and accurately the feasibility and cost of each scheme. In order to realize Gehry's complex sculptural designs, the architectural team employed a computer program called Katya, originally developed by the French software company Dassault for the aerospace industry. The Chicago-based structural engineers Skidmore, Owings and Merrill converted the Katya images into their own in-house computer system and devised an efficient, rational, steel-framed structure to accommodate the building's unusual forms. Computer programs were also used to cut and drill the steel. Joints, junctions and bolt holes were all manufactured to a high degree of accuracy. The exterior walls were first constructed of a series of vertically stacked trusses, but each one of the 3 by 3 meter trusses had to differ in length and angle to follow the curving wall profiles. A secondary system of flexible steel brackets fixed to the primary structure support 2 millimeter thick galvanized panels. Now the smooth organic forms of the building start to evolve. Gehry favors metal to clad his buildings. For example, the folding facade of the Weissman Museum is covered in stainless steel tiles, which create an impression of fluid movement. He employs metal as a skin that adapts easily to roofs as well as walls, allowing him to create three-dimensional shapes from a single material.
I also like the way metal plays with the light, and so it was very important to me to find a metal here that would play with the light in Bilbao, which is unlike the light in California. It's a lot of gray days, a lot of rainy days, not too strong a winter, but a lot of gray. I experimented with different metals. I found a small piece of titanium in our shop that somebody'd left, and I grabbed it and said, well, try this. So we put it out on the wall, hung it up, and it rained that day in LA, and the little piece stood out golden from the distance. I was just flabbergasted. I couldn't believe it. So I said, we've got to use that. That's it. It's wonderful. Well, of course, titanium turned out to be very expensive, more than twice the cost of stainless steel, so it would not fit our budget.
Fortunately, just at that time, there was a fluctuation in the world market price of titanium, and the cost dropped dramatically. Also, Gehry realized that it could be rolled to half the thickness of stainless steel, wafer thin, to 1/3 of a millimeter. Suddenly, it was affordable. However, it took almost a year of experiments with the oils and acids used in the rolling process for the titanium to look like that small golden sample first seen in Los Angeles. The titanium tiles are fixed to the frame by clips anchored through a waterproof membrane. This makes a shallow dent in each sheet, so that the effect on the surface is soft and slightly billowy. In spite of its fragile appearance, the metal is extremely durable and stable. Titanium is less sharply reflective than stainless steel. Its surface changes to soft golds and silvers with the changing light. It is the inspired use of the titanium that gives the museum its extraordinary dramatic quality. Frank Gehry is an architect who embraces the concept of imagery and the vitality of natural forms. He has exploited the metal's characteristics of malleability in the organic shapes of flowers and unfolding petals. The logical development of his designs is apparent when looking at his early conceptual ideas. Gary became fascinated with the sinuous movements he observed in snakes and fish forms. He began to create these images in a series of colorful lamps. In the 1980s, he devised an elegant 6.7-meter-high standing fish sculpture with glass scales supported by a steel and timber frame. He experimented with the fish shape, retaining the sense of movement, yet seeing how abstract and minimal he could make it before losing the original concept. This eventually led to the language of compound curves immediately recognizable in the fluid lines of Bilbao.
I'm interested in finding passion and feeling in a building to replace but to do it without decoration. And so I've been playing with movement. I was doing it intuitively, I didn't consciously say movement is going to replace decoration. It just interested me because of great sculptures I've seen that have a sense of movement. Sculptures by Phidias, Indian dancing figures, and so on.
The restless motion of the sea has always held a strong fascination for him.
I'm a sailor. I love the aesthetics of the sails. I've been looking at sail paintings, the Dutch Van de Velde 16th century seascapes with all the ships, and I was able to do a tower here, which came out of that language.
The nautical imagery is immediately recognizable in the thin limestone panels of the tower that twist and split apart dramatically. Like a theatrical set, the cladding is only partial, leaving its structural core of massive steelwork exposed to the elements at the rear. From the tower, steps lead under the bridge to a broad, sweeping ramp, a sinuous curve evolved from Gary's snake forms. This walkway passes between the river's edge and a water garden that runs in front of the museum. The building is repeated in reflection, re-emphasizing the unifying theme of water throughout the whole project. The titanium defines the main gallery areas of the museum. This is partnered with dense, honey-colored Spanish limestone from Granada, which houses the formal galleries and the public areas. Each stone panel, only 3 centimeters thick, has been milled by computer-controlled machinery with great precision to create the angled planes and curves that distinguish Gary's design. The third element in the building is glass, and the handling of this material is impressive. Light is one of the most important parts of the museum's statement. The titanium surface facing the river is interrupted by an inclined glass and steel wall marking the exterior of the atrium. The glass is shielded by a prominent steel-framed umbrella canopy, supported on a simple stone column. Silhouetted figures move behind the glass, relating the interior life of the museum to the world outside. Multifaceted panes are reflections of reflections. Patterns and shadows create designs themselves reminiscent of modern art. The window glazing alongside the busy road bridge adds a surreal dimension to the museum's roof. Slanted, angled, and recessed, the windows lie deep in shadow or are prominently framed in the quilted gold and silver of the titanium. Light is focused through the glazing into the museum's largest gallery, the double layers of glass shielding it from the roar of the traffic outside. The problems of cleaning and maintaining both the windows and the irregular titanium surfaces of the building have been elegantly resolved by employing the expert skills of Basque mountaineers. These abseilers move up and down ropes attached to steel rings fixed to the structure.
there was room in this building to run at least 3 major retrospective shows simultaneously, that I thought that it would be an advantage to have separate entrances possible so that parts of the building could be closed down to install a show while other parts were open, and that some of the special shows could be entered from a different entrance, so that it gave them some flexibility in how they run the museum.
So Gary designed wide limestone steps that descend on the west elevation from the level of the 19th century city to the river walkway. A staircase from the De La Salve Bridge also leads via the tower down to the river promenade. On the upper level, the front of the museum is approached by a wide plaza. This popular meeting place is accessible to the public from the main points of the city. At one side of the plaza, Gary has introduced a surprise in the form of his only block of solid color, a cobalt blue stucco-covered administration building. Spectacular glazing, monumental curved limestone blocks and gleaming titanium overlook a flight of shallow processional steps leading from the plaza. Visitors are funneled down them to the main entrance hall of the galleries. The interior of the museum is as startlingly original as its exterior. It centers around a great atrium, a soaring cathedral-like space 50 meters high. The movement is all vertical. Massive volumes bounded by a background of glass and steel thrust towards the sculptured roof. The angled curtain wall rises the full height of the atrium. Its special glass incorporates microscopic particles of metal that provide solar control, yet are crystal clear and capture all the available light. Natural light also filters down through roof lights set high in the curved forms of the roof dome. The principal source, seen from outside, is the flower of titanium petals which crowns the museum and focuses the light downwards into the atrium. Vertical circulation is provided by glass towers housing elevators and winding stairs giving access to the galleries on the upper levels. The form of this staircase with its angled glazing is strongly reminiscent of the powerful facade of Gary's Nederlanden office building in Prague. Walkways curve around the atrium, and as visitors stroll along them, they are constantly arrested by the spectacular vistas below. Window walls stretch along the walkways. Through the glass, glimpses of buildings reinforce the link with the city outside. The atrium is important in providing a constant point of orientation within the museum. Radiating from the center, 19 galleries on 3 levels provide 11,000 square meters of exhibition space. Each gallery differs in shape and size according to its use. Frank Gehry has a very close relationship with artists and regards art as a great source of inspiration for his architecture.
I think, for me, painting is the highest possible kind of activity for mankind. I have it on an enormous pedestal. I would be afraid to do it. I learn from paintings. I look at paintings all day long, all the time. I think there's a lot of information for architects in painting. I call it a candy store. I think the architects that dismiss it are making a big error. I look at older paintings, but I also spend a lot of time looking at my contemporaries.
To provide the best possible conditions for their different styles, Gehry worked closely with many of the artists exhibiting in the museum. The gigantic long gallery, on the same level as the atrium, was specially conceived to be a perfect setting for both temporary exhibitions and works of art on a monumental scale. The column-free space is 130 meters long by 30 meters wide and is spanned by a series of huge curved steel roof beams. The gallery is like the great hull of a boat lying half under the De La Salve Bridge. Some of the sculptural pieces were specially designed for this vast gallery, and here have enough space to allow them to make their full dramatic impact. There are different exhibition spaces for specific purposes or particular artists. Gehry's brief was to create freely formed shapes for contemporary artists and more formal rectangular galleries for early modernist works. The variety of display areas that have evolved makes the museum remarkably versatile.
The galleries that have shape to them were for artists who are living. The idea was that these artists would interact, that there would be some kind of collaborative effect by them finding a space, which a lot of them do, and they love it, and they responded very well. In fact, Kiefer put in his first 6 paintings and looked at them and didn't like them in the space and took them home and brought 6 more because he said that he wanted to deal with the space. I added in those galleries, the shaped ones, catwalks for the lighting way up high, and that's because I wanted them to be used for performance art, which there is a lot of now. And this makes the museum accessible. They could have 3 or 4 performances going on in different kinds of spaces.
Unexpected openings in the roof structure allow the daylight to penetrate deep into the museum. The control of natural light in the interior is as important to Gehry as its effects on the external forms of his building. He has cleverly contrived ways of directing the light into almost all the galleries. It's diffused inside by the pale flooring and the white walls, creating a serene atmosphere. Each of the second-floor galleries in the classical wing of the museum is lit by tall light wells. These cut through the third-floor galleries above and pour natural light down from skylights set high in the roof. Shaped galleries are top-lit by the organic forms of petals or leaves. The power of the interior of this building, the strength of line and angle, the different textures of the materials, never overwhelm the art, but combine to enhance it and stimulate the viewer's imagination. The museum bears witness to Frank Gehry's respect for the artist and is a vivid illustration of the close links between art and architecture. Bilbao has been given a building of great integrity, with a vitality that matches that of the city itself. This is a museum for the 21st century.
I'm constantly asked, well, after Bilbao, what can you do to top this? And I don't think about it that way. I don't think you're going to top anything. Each project deserves its own place and time, but they're all my children, and I put as much energy into everything.
Cela fait maintenant 10 ans que j'ai fait les premiers dessins de ces bâtiments de la Cité de la Musique. À l'entrée du parc de la Villette, j'ai imaginé cet ensemble très diversifié de lieux consacrés à la musique et à la danse. Et je crois que cet assemblage n'a pas d'équivalent dans le monde. Avec ses jeux de volume plein et de transparence, la cité se déploie en 2 grands quartiers, à l'est et à l'ouest de la Grande Halle. Ce sont des métaphores de ville avec des immeubles et des rues qui accueillent l'infinie variété des musiques et des musiciens. À l'ouest, sur l'avenue Jean Jaurès, le Conservatoire national supérieur de musique et de danse de Paris donne l'idée d'une grande institution dans laquelle on entre en franchissant un bassin. Mais ce premier coup d'œil ne dit pas tout. L'intérieur nous ouvre un parcours contrasté, avec des surprises, des couleurs, des ombres et des lumières. Je voulais que le conservatoire se découvre progressivement, que tout ne soit pas donné au premier coup d'œil comme dans un bâtiment classique, mais petit à petit, que les lignes, les profondeurs, les jeux croisés des symétries et dissymétries invitent au mouvement. J'aime que l'architecture se découvre ainsi dans la durée, en séquence. Pour moi, c'est ici qu'elle rejoint l'expérience musicale. Après le foyer des élèves, nous descendons encore, paradoxalement vers la lumière, et arrivons à une sorte de cloître, un des cœurs du conservatoire autour duquel s'organisent les grandes salles d'orchestre. Tout mon travail a été de donner à chacune de ces familles de musiciens leur liberté, leur intimité, leur maison, et non de les rassembler en un seul grand bâtiment. Il y avait 2 grands registres de réflexion. L'un qui porte sur la ville, le quartier, l'inscription dans ce site de la Villette et la porte de Pantin, et l'autre qui porte sur le programme architectural lui-même, la vie de ces musiciens à l'intérieur. Il fallait construire la Cité de la musique de chaque côté de l'esplanade. D'emblée, j'ai refusé de tout axer sur la grande halle, ce qui était pour moi emphatique et pompier. Je voulais donner une nouvelle orientation au site et y inclure cet axe diagonal qui ouvre sur le parc. Aujourd'hui, cela forme une place en trapèze qui paraît naturelle. Elle met en relation l'avenue, le parc, la grande halle et les deux ailes de la Cité de la musique. J'ai regroupé les lieux d'enseignement à l'ouest et ceux ouverts au public à l'est, dans deux programmes très différents mais complémentaires, qui comprennent chacun un aspect multiple et unitaire. Du côté conservatoire, nous avons une seule institution, mais une diversité considérable de volumes sur un terrain serré, avec beaucoup d'exigences de circulation et d'acoustique. De l'autre côté de la place, au contraire, il n'y a pas un, mais 6 programmes voués à la musique. 6 utilisateurs, regroupés sous un long pan oblique d'où émerge cette coupole de la grande salle de concert, avec autour le foyer en spirale, le musée de la musique, des lieux de recherche, des lieux de répétition, des logements pour les étudiants, un café, etc. Après les esquisses, l'étude de ce programme de 1000 pages, les mois d'échange avec les musiciens, le dessin de centaines de plans, le chantier a commencé en avril 1987. Il y a là près de 200 salles toutes différentes selon leur destination sur 40 000 mètres carrés. C'est donc un chantier qui a été très difficile, très technique, demandant un soin constant dans une grande tension, car le budget était très serré. J'ai d'abord travaillé sur le nombre, sur la densité. Pour alléger, j'ai rythmé. J'ai tout fait pour éviter l'oppression, les séries répétitives, la claustrophobie qu'aurait donné naturellement un vaste container unique, isolé acoustiquement. J'ai fragmenté et ouvert, j'ai fait des bâtiments séparés et liés. Ce sont autant d'enveloppes acoustiques distinctes où chaque famille de musiciens a trouvé sa maison. En fait, j'ai souvent travaillé sur ce thème de la fragmentation, commençant à désunir pour réunifier. C'est un moyen pour moi de créer des parcours, des lieux, puis de travailler sur la relation entre ces choses séparées, sur l'espacement, l'entre-deux, le vide qu'elles génèrent entre elles. Comme l'a écrit Lao Tse, la maison, ce n'est pas les murs, ce n'est pas le toit, ni même le sol, c'est le vide entre ces choses, car c'est là que j'habite. Sur l'avenue, on voit d'abord ces 4 plots réguliers liés entre eux. Derrière, plus librement, sur 4 travées, s'installent tous les autres bâtiments. Entre eux, il y a ces grandes transparences. L'ensemble démultiplie ainsi les surfaces de façade, donc les prises de jour. Et complété par des puits de lumière, cela permet d'apporter beaucoup de clarté en profondeur, donc de rassembler les salles dans une proximité. L'idée de la façade est venue tout de suite, dès l'esquisse, avec sa courbe, sa scansion, son grand auvent. C'est elle qui marque, dans une monumentalité douce, si l'on veut, la présence de l'institution dans la ville. L'écran phonique que forme l'auvent permet d'ouvrir plus largement les fenêtres des derniers étages et de leur donner une autre atmosphère. C'est aussi un réflecteur du ciel, donc de lumière, pour l'intérieur des classes. À partir de cet extérieur sur la ville, calme, régulier, dans sa dominante claire, on entre dans le mouvement qui est déjà sensible sur cette façade latérale, où se trouvent les logements des étudiants. Au contraire, avec la cour intérieure, on entre dans un autre monde. Un monde de volumes contrastés, pluriels, colorés. Lorsque les musiciens sortent de la concentration isolée et assourdie d'une salle de travail, ils se trouvent immédiatement dans un milieu vivant, où la lumière vient du ciel, où l'œil peut voir vers la ville, vers le parc, et surtout où l'oreille soudain décompresse et perçoit des sons venus de loin. C'est tout l'intérêt de cette fragmentation en bâtiments séparés, car ils sont reliés par des lieux transparents qui rendent les circulations lumineuses, fluides et diversifiées. Alors ces circulations deviennent des lieux de rencontre, de vie collective essentiels. Elles apportent aussi dans leur parcours cette expérience sensorielle du bâtiment qui donne son caractère au conservatoire et qui imprègne la vie quotidienne d'un certain plaisir. Les circulations, elles ne sont pas feutrées comme sont les couloirs de tous les conservatoires. Ce caractère assourdi, je l'ai concentré sur les sas. D'habitude, les salles de musique sont disposées le long de couloirs assourdis. Ici, chaque bâtiment est une enveloppe acoustique distincte avec un sas d'entrée. Comme il y a de l'opaque et du transparent, j'ai établi les espaces sur une partition du sonore, de l'assourdi et de l'isolé.
Voilà qui est bien. Tu diminues. Et tu coupes comme si tu tranchais net. Top.
Partout, le son affecte les formes, les matériaux. Une fois l'isolation réussie, il faut que chaque salle ait sa musicalité. Chacune est en fait un instrument de musique particulier, adapté à un certain usage avec son caractère, son temps de réverbération. Cette musicalité des salles interdit les faces parallèles et les plafonds horizontaux pour éviter écho et réverbération. Le rectangle est proscrit et c'est pourquoi on voit de nombreuses découpes obliques, courbes et losanges. Les incisions, les incurvations qu'on voit à l'extérieur du bâtiment, toutes ces formes qui semblent à la fois générées par des intentions sur le vide, sur l'extérieur, génèrent ou sont aussi la conséquence d'une réflexion sur l'intérieur des salles. Du soliste à l'orchestre, il y a des salles de toutes les formes et de toutes les dimensions. À la Villette, le conservatoire est enfin doté de grandes salles d'orchestre. Je les ai regroupées à la base autour du patio. Clé de voûte de ces salles d'orchestre, les 3 salles publiques permettent aux élèves de jouer dans de véritables conditions de spectacle. L'isolement acoustique interdit toute superposition sur les grandes salles. C'est pourquoi je les ai regroupées comme une ville basse autour du patio, 7 mètres plus bas que le sol. C'est tout un volume d'air et de lumière qui est ainsi libéré pour les étages supérieurs. Les jours de représentation, le conservatoire accueille le public par une entrée indépendante située au rez-de-chaussée du pavillon de la danse. On oublie totalement que ces salles sont au sous-sol parce qu'elles donnent sur ce cloître qui s'ouvre sur un jardin. Avec sa cage de scène et sa fosse d'orchestre, la salle d'art lyrique donne les conditions de travail d'un petit opéra. Cette salle d'orgue exigeait un très grand volume, mais peu de sièges, peu de surface au sol. Je l'ai donc verticalisée et j'ai cherché une forme qui assure des réflexions du son du haut vers le bas. Cette salle est également vouée à la musique de chambre. Une corolle de panneaux inclinables sert au public de réflecteur sonore. Sous cette terrasse, l'espace interdisciplinaire est ce qu'on appelle un espace modulable. C'est un lieu de représentation expérimentale pouvant unir théâtre, musique et danse. Au même niveau, il y a tous les plateaux d'orchestre, dont le plus important est réservé aux répétitions en formation symphonique. Il n'est pas ouvert au public.
Le chef d'orchestre doit avoir des oreilles de lapin. Et encore de lapins du désert. Ce sont les lapins qui ont les plus grandes oreilles. Alors, de chaque côté, ils doivent avoir des antennes. Hein, la flûte, le deuxième violon, premier violon, etc. De l'autre côté, violoncelle, contrebasse.
Comme chaque famille de musiciens a ici sa maison, j'ai donné aux danseurs un bâtiment à part qui est sur la place, un endroit pour eux, repérable. Pour parler avec les autres, il faut déjà avoir son lieu à soi.
Et 7. Il n'y a pas beaucoup qui compte, hein. 1, 2. Et rond le centre. Et pique loin. Et retire, développe. Et 1, 3, 5. C'est bien. Et 7. Et pique loin, ouvre le dos. 3. 5. Et talon, 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 talon. Et va loin. Et va loin. Et glisse sur l'air, là, glisse sur l'air. Et respire.
C'est un schéma trop simple de croire que c'est la fonction qui dicte la forme. L'idée de fonction ne peut inclure toutes les intentions, tous les désirs que nous avons pour un lieu. Et puis, il n'y a jamais une seule réponse possible, une seule forme juste pour une fonction, et réciproquement, aucun lieu ou aucune forme ne doit avoir un seul usage, un seul sens. Le concept spatial ou formel doit toujours enrichir et dépasser le programme fonctionnel. Je voulais unifier toute cette cour sculpturale, et l'ondulation de la toiture est venue pour cela, par hasard, un jour où j'avais fait basculer une première maquette qui s'incurvait.
doit être fait avec humour.
Inventer des lieux, c'est se mettre un peu à la place de tous ceux qui vont travailler là. En fait, cela ressemble au travail d'un romancier ou d'un metteur en scène. À la fin, il y a une atmosphère, qui est un aboutissement de l'architecture. Là où le visible, le sonore rencontre la vie, ils fusionnent. Et c'est là que les lieux peuvent communiquer une énergie, une légère euphorie, un plaisir, une intelligence parfois. Pour moi, c'est à cela que sert l'architecture. Comment vivre et travailler au milieu de 2000 personnes et être chez soi. La ligne droite, la surface plane sont les premières conquêtes de l'architecture, l'épreuve de l'existence de l'homme sur la Terre. Mais souvent, mes références architecturales sont géologiques. Des courbes, falaises, talwegs, canyons se retrouvent alors dans mon travail. Avec les élèves, nous avons parlé d'une cour où il serait possible de spatialiser la musique, d'avoir simultanément plusieurs points d'émission entre lesquels les auditeurs pourraient se déplacer. Le perchoir, la loggia, le jardin, les terrasses sont faites pour cela. Ce qui compte le plus pour moi, c'est le rythme, le mouvement, l'enchaînement qui met en relation les formes, et c'est ce que nous apprennent les musiciens. J'aime que les lieux ne se donnent pas tout d'un coup en une image. Il faut les parcourir.
Él no quiere llegar a su boda, pero va a llegar.
Chicago, for better or worse, the epitome of the modern city. For good or ill, the face of the 20th century, a man-made geometric landscape of glass, concrete, and steel. Much of the 20th century face was first fashioned not here in the New World, but in the Old, in a revolutionary school of architecture and design, founded in a small provincial town in Germany at a moment of political unrest and economic chaos. It was called the Bauhaus.
The Bauhaus meant something to everybody. See, the myth was already spread around that if it was Bauhaus, it must be either good or bad, depending on what your opinion was.
Ja, am Bauhaus verdichteten sich tatsächlich viele Avantgarde-Ideen, viele auch revolutionäre Ideen der 20er Jahre. Es gab einfach in ganz Europa keine Kunsthochschule, die so komprimiert die Neuerungen tatsächlich in die Praxis überführt haben.
Etwas ganz anderes bewirkt als alle Kunstschulen und alle technischen Hochschulen. Es hat nach einem Weg gesucht, wie man mit dem Leben ästhetisch fertig wird.
The Bauhaus was the greatest design institution of the 20th century, without a doubt. It's affected everything. Our cities on a huge scale turned them into rather mechanical machines. And it's turned our interiors into rather nice, simplified, kitchen-like instruments.
Die
Kontribution des Bauhauses bestand darin, dass wir, was ich nennen möchte, eine optische Wissenschaft sammelten.
The Bauhaus was born out of catastrophe. The new world it helped to shape came painfully into being some 3/4 of a century ago, even as the old world was collapsing. The Bauhaus was the idea of Walter Gropius, a German architect who, while serving as an officer in the Great War, dreamed about a school of art and design that would help change the world. The nightmare of war, the mechanized slaughter, made Gropius long for a world in which the machine would be tamed for the benefit of man.
Well, I still remember when I came out of the First World War, and there was one moment in my life which I do not forget, but all of a sudden I became aware that I would have to take part in something completely new which would change the conditions I had been living in before. When I think of the beginning of my life, there have been utopian ideas and nobody thought that they might become reality, but they have become reality today.
After the war, Gropius began to make his utopian dream come true. He was asked to found an art school and expressed his revolutionary ideas in a manifesto published early in 1919. The school would be called the Bauhaus, Building House, and the manifesto was illustrated by a dramatic woodcut of a Gothic cathedral, its spire soaring up towards the starry sky. The ultimate aim of all creative activity is the building. We must all return to the crafts. The school is the servant of the workshops and will one day be absorbed by them. Let us together create the new building of the future, which will one day rise towards the heavens as the crystalline symbol of a new and coming faith. Gropius was not alone in his utopian aspirations. His school was supported by public funds. The revolutionary tone of the Bauhaus Manifesto echoed the spirit of the times. The Soviet Revolution and the German mutinies it inspired helped end the war. The armistice and abdication of the Kaiser were followed by an abortive communist revolution in Germany and the declaration of a republic from the balcony of the Royal Palace in Berlin. The Bauhaus was founded in the old city of Weimar, where the new German constitution was also devised. While the Bauhaus began work, the politicians debated in a theatre half a mile away. They met there because Weimar was less troubled by rioting than Berlin, and because Weimar, once the home of the writers Goethe and Schiller, was regarded as the cultural heart of the nation. In these two buildings, a revolution in art education took place. It was a revolution which gave us the method of workshop-based training used in many schools of art and craft today.
Dann war mir klar, dass eine größere Verbindung zwischen den neuen Produktionswaffen, den Maschinen und dem künstlerischen Menschen hergestellt werden müsste. Infolgedessen habe ich Werkstätten errichtet, in denen die Leute von zwei Seiten erzogen wurden. Einmal vom Künstlerischen und vom anderen vom Handwerklichen. Es ist oft missverstanden worden, dass das auf Handwerk aufgebaut war. Das war aber eine Zelle der Vorbereitung Man kann nicht eine Maschine verstehen, bevor man nicht die Handwerkszeuge verstanden hat.
So the backbone of the Bauhaus in Weimar was its workshops, where the students, known as apprentices, acquired their skills not by designing on paper, but by actually making things. Chairs and other types of furniture in wood, for example, bookbindings, stained glass, implements in glass and metal, fabrics or ceramics. A major innovation at the Bauhaus was that craft skills were taught by master craftsmen, while aesthetic inspiration came from artists. The pottery workshop was run by a master craftsman under the artistic supervision of the sculptor Gerhard Marx, who relished the bohemian atmosphere at the Bauhaus.
Wirklich, da war Leben, und zwar künstlerisches Leben. Also das hieß, dass man sich die Schuhe auf die nackten Füße malte und Umzüge machte und rote Fahnen anklebten und so weiter. An Persönlichkeiten unter Schülern und Lehrern fehlte es wirklich am Bauhaus nicht.
In my mind, the painters of the modern time had done some constructive thinking. They had developed a certain philosophy as to artistic space and colors and form. So I thought, though the final aim of the Bauhaus for me was architecture, that the painters might be able to bring in really the beginning of a new constructive thought. And they have shown that it was so. We have to pull the whole thing together. We have to destroy these separations between painting and sculpture and architecture and design and so on. It is all one.
Gropius didn't employ just any artists in his search for teachers who could think constructively. On the Bauhaus staff were some of the most original painters of the age. There was the Swiss, Paul Klee, a mystic, as gifted a violinist as he was an artist. There was Vasily Kandinsky, too, the Russian who, before the Great War, had virtually invented abstract painting. He was now developing a visual language consisting of triangles, circles and squares, expressive textures and dynamically moving lines. Kandinsky's compositions made no reference to nature. They were shaped by the way he felt. Another painter who taught at the Bauhaus was Johannes Itten, a metaphysical dreamer who was responsible for one of the many innovations which made the Bauhaus such a remarkable school. This was the compulsory foundation course, to which Klee and Kandinsky also contributed.
Johannes Itten's foundation course was the basic unifying factor in the Bauhaus for its entire period. Johannes Itten was there for 3 years, and he was the one to invent this method of teaching, where he would start off with breathing exercises, with intense introspection, with a kind of Buddhist-like calm, which he learned actually from Buddhism.
Itten was also a disciple of Mazdaznan, a variety of Zoroastrianism, in whose service he shaved his head and wore monkish robes, even while teaching.
Well, Bauhaus was the first time in art and design education that the emphasis had been put on the individual student, the student's emotions and senses and intellect. And it was also the first time that design had been taught in a coherent way within an art context. A student would arrive and enroll for the preliminary course. And instead of previous preliminary courses, which had been all about the history of art and learning about the solutions of past ages, you went straight into abstract forms. You learnt about materials and their textures. You learnt about colour theory. So it was a kind of grammar that you learnt for 6 months to find out about your individuality and which direction will you go. That was the basic structure of the course.
In drawing as well as in three-dimensional design, a great stress was laid on texture. We had to imitate texture of wood, of glass, of wool, of anything we found interesting in contrast to other textures. And also, we were asked to build up three-dimensional structures of various materials.
Since it was a depression, a period when they had no money, you had to work with what was at hand. So you would say to the students, go out to the junkyard and pick up from the scrap heap where you can, and then try to find out what's in the materials, in the nature of materials.
My girlfriend, for example, had cut her hair short at that time. So I used some of her hair for a combination of things which I had found and built up into a three-dimensional structure.
The Bauhaus invented the modern art student. I mean, up until the Bauhaus, art students were rather conformist characters who sat in serried ranks, all doing the same thing, all rather middle-class people doing watercolours and copies of antique sculptures and so on. And from the word go, the Bauhaus attracted a certain kind of rather politically radical student.
I was a student, only 16 years old at that time, and I liked it at the Bauhaus because it's so incredibly free, and I could do whatever I liked at the Bauhaus, anything you liked. My little group went to the theater, and there was a statue of Goethe and Schiller, and we painted Goethe and Schiller red. The students were always doing these things, and I was amongst them.
By 1920, the local inhabitants of Weimar are already complaining that they dress in this outlandish way. They dress like beggars, nude bathing at midnight, strange music at weekends. Because it was residential, they have these wonderful parties and theatre events and things at weekends. So, you know, your long-haired radical art student begins with the Bauhaus. So that's one aspect of it that made the locals very uneasy, I think.
When Gropius opened the school in Weimar, he said that he wanted everyone who applied to have a chance to get in. He said there was to be no deference to ladies. As far as work is concerned, we are all craftsmen. One of the problems, of course, was that many, many women applied, far too many as far as he was concerned. So after a year, he had to begin to segregate them and put them into various workshops because he felt that metalwork and furniture was too difficult for women to be doing. So they were directed into the pottery workshop and into the bookbinding workshop and into the weaving workshop, which means, of course, they are stereotyped to a certain extent into doing what was considered to be women's work. Weaving is women's work. And obviously art can move into textile design and weaving more comfortably, perhaps, than more formal preoccupations. So that in the early years, the designers in textiles are producing these magnificent weaves, tapestries, which are there to be hung on walls.
One of the most brilliant women students, Marianne Brandt, wasn't a weaver, however. A member of the metal workshop, she made some extraordinarily beautiful household utensils in copper and other materials. By the time Brandt was producing her characteristically refined and functional objects, the Bauhaus workshops had begun to move away from individually crafted pieces towards products made as prototypes with later industrial manufacture and a mass market in mind. Elegant, simple pieces are the forerunners of what today passes in every home for good, thoroughly modern design. Then they seemed startlingly plain. Everyday objects like tea infusers were designed in terms of their function and the need for mass production. Some products were already being manufactured in series by the Bauhaus workshops. A chess set with pieces signalling the way they moved across the board sold well. A cradle consisting only of triangles, circles and rectangles in the primary colours remained unique. A range of wooden toys made up of separate, brightly coloured elements is still on sale today. The design of many of these products was closely linked to foundation course teaching, in which there was an emphasis on colour and geometry. In the foundation course, attempts were made to subject form and colour to scientific laws. Kandinsky taught that the primary forms, the circle, the square, the triangle, represent and convey qualities identical to those inherent in the primary colours, blue, red and yellow. Primary colours and shapes also inspired the productions of the Bauhaus theatre workshop. Theatre was central to Bauhaus teaching because it provided a way of bringing several artistic forms into an intimate and expressive unity. Its artistic director was the painter and sculptor Oskar Schlemmer.
Ich halte die Bühnenwerkstatt des Bauhauses für eine der wichtigsten, zentralen Punkte dieser Institution, weil sie am deutlichsten den Gemeinschaftsgedanken in die Tat umgesetzt haben. Die Studierenden konnten also sowohl Architektur, Kostüme und Masken entwerfen und experimentieren. Und das konnte man in dieser Vielfalt tatsächlich nur an der Bühnenwerkstatt.
We did things like that. And there's my leg in there. My teachers at the time were Schlemmer, Klee, Kandinsky, and it was Moholy Nodge, who was the teacher for the foundation. And he was marvelous and wonderful and quite wonderful.
Laszlo Moholy-Nagy was a Hungarian constructivist and the master of many media. He took over the foundation course in 1923, sweeping away Itten's metaphysics and mysticism, replacing them with the mystique of the machine.
Moholy-Nagy was an extremely lively personality. He was almost childlike in his interest that everything new which came up in techniques and so on electrified him. He went right after that. He was an experimental fellow. He tried everything out himself. He was perhaps the closest friend of mine in the Bauhaus, and we influenced each other quite a bit. Molinari was understanding what was going on in the economy and in the industrial life of the modern time and tried to build his ideas into that.
The new foundation course was also taught by Joseph Albers, who came to the Bauhaus as a student in 1919 and became the first graduate to teach there.
Wenn ich aus einem Material etwas herstelle,